Of course, no Abuja airport was being built to invest in, and while Paul Aguma was a real, successful banker, he was certainly not the man Sakaguchi met that day. Instead, he had encountered one of Nigeria's most skilled scammers, Emmanuel Nwude. Emmanuel Nwude, the man who sold a fake airport for $242 million. These days, with the internet at everyone's fingertips and nearly all transactions, regardless of size, tracked digitally, executing high-level fraud is nearly impossible. Scammers and thieves have had to adapt, changing their tactics and conducting their shady business behind keyboards instead of in back alleys or corrupt conference rooms. However, not too long ago, in the 1990s, orchestrating a multi-million-dollar scam across countries was much easier, and no story exemplifies this better than that of Emmanuel Nwude's fake airport scam. Between 1995 and 1998, Emmanuel Nwude managed to steal nearly $250 million from a Brazilian bank by convincing its unsuspecting director that the funds would be used for a non-existent brand-new airport in Nigeria's capital. In this video, we'll delve deeper into the third-largest bank fraud in history and explore what transpired when Nwude's deceit was finally uncovered. Nigeria has earned a reputation as a hotspot for internet scams and has maintained that title for quite some time. From fabricated tales of impoverished princes to cleverly disguised get-rich-quick schemes, Nigerian scammers have become so prevalent that Nigerian money transfer scams now constitute a category of their own on government anti-cybercrime websites. Referred to as 419 scams, the name originates from the section of the Nigerian Criminal Code that addresses internet fraud and other types of scams. What Emmanuel Nwude executed, however, was far more sophisticated than the typical 419 scam, requiring an in-depth understanding of the Nigerian banking system and the adoption of a false identity to succeed. Nwude wasn't a part-time fraudster either. Unlike contemporary scammers who solicit items like Apple gift cards, the scale of Nwude's heist was astronomical. To simplify matters, we can break down Emmanuel Nwude's scheme into 3 steps. Impersonate the governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, Paul Aguma. Contact the victim, the director of Brazil's Banco Noroeste, Nelson Sketch, regarding an incredible business opportunity, a brand new airport in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. Receive as much cash as possible and distribute the remaining funds into multiple accounts worldwide to avoid suspicion. Multiple elements had to align for Nwude to execute the airport scam. He required the right target, someone in a high enough position at a bank to access the necessary funds, who was also naive enough to fall for Nwude's deception and willing to embezzle money from their own institution. They found their mark in one Nelson Sakaguchi, the director of Brazil's Banco Noroeste. On the surface, Sakaguchi seemed too legitimate to be a viable target. He had spent years as a professional international banker and achieved significant success in his dealings. This success is what secured him the position with Banco Noroeste, but something about him must have piqued Nwude's interest. Perhaps it was because, for a time, Emmanuel Nwude had also been a high-level banker. Before he became the mastermind behind one of the largest bank frauds in history, he served as the director of the Union Bank of Nigeria. Union Bank of Nigeria was a legitimate institution. It had been operating in Nigeria since 1917. Working for them had given Nwude insider knowledge of the banking world, making it easy for him to assume the identity of another high-level banker to deceive Sakaguchi. According to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, Nelson Sakaguchi had received a fax from Taffeta Williams, who claimed to be a senior staff member at the federal government of Nigeria within the Ministry of Aviation. Williams' letter stated that Nigeria's Ministry of Aviation was seeking investors for a new airport in the country's capital, Abuja. In return for the investment, Sakaguchi would receive a personal commission of $10 million. The proposal made sense to Sakaguchi. In 1976, the Nigerian government moved the capital from the island city of Lagos to Abuja, which was more centrally located. Since the relocation, no major airport had been constructed, and the country was experiencing an economic boom, which meant an airport should have been a brilliant investment. Sakaguchi was in, and he sought more information. Soon, Nelson Sakaguchi arrived in London, prepared to meet with representatives from the Ministry of Aviation and the rest of the Nigerian delegation. A man, clearly the leader of the Nigerian team, greeted Sakaguchi as Paul Agwuma, who was then the director of the Central Bank of Nigeria. Accompanying him was the representative from the Ministry of Aviation. Sakaguchi had heard of Agwuma, and his reputation was impeccable. He had every reason to feel confident about the upcoming meeting. It didn't take long for a deal to be struck $50 million from Sakaguchi's Banco Noroeste. It was already a significant deal, but that figure would soon balloon from the tens of millions into the hundreds of millions. By the end of it all, Nelson Sakaguchi would be defrauded of $242 million, with $191 million of it paid in cash. Of course, no Abuja airport was being built to invest in, and while Paul Agwuma was a real, successful banker, he was certainly not the man Sakaguchi met that day. Instead, he had encountered one of Nigeria's most skilled scammers, Emmanuel Nwude. Everything, from the initial fax to the final exchange of money, was fabricated. Nelson Sakaguchi had been thoroughly deceived, and Banco Noroeste would have to face the repercussions of its director's actions. Everything came crashing down for Nelson Sakaguchi when another corporation, the Spanish bank Banco Santander, expressed interest in acquiring the struggling Banco Noroeste. Little did they know that Banco Noroeste was faltering because of Sakaguchi's missteps. During a joint board meeting between the two banks, questions arose regarding the unusual allocation of some of Banco Noroeste's funds. Over half of the bank's capital was unaccounted for and instead found in a peculiar bank account in the Cayman Islands. It was an enormous sum of money, and Sakaguchi had no answers to provide to the other board members. Gradually, the truth began to emerge. Sakaguchi had been deceived and had used the bank's capital to finance the fraudulent airport investment. He was in too deep, and there was no turning back. Criminal investigations were promptly initiated, and all leads pointed back to Nigeria, but not to the Ministry of Aviation or the Central Bank of Nigeria. Instead, they traced back to the infamous scam artist Emmanuel Nwude. As it turned out, Emmanuel Nwude hadn't acted alone. He had several accomplices who made up the group that originally met Sakaguchi in London, meaning that while Nwude was facing consequences, he wasn't facing them alone. In February 2004, Emmanuel Nwude and his accomplices Amaka Anajemba, Emmanuel Ofolu, Nzerebi Akoli, and Obo Mosakwi were arrested in Abuja. Just 2 years earlier, Nigerian President Olusegun Obasanjo had vowed to crack down on the rampant scams in Nigeria, beginning with the establishment of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission. This meant that Emmanuel Nwude and his crew had no chance of escaping their airport fraud deception. After numerous attempts, including a bomb threat to the courthouse, a second arrest, bribery, attempted kidnapping, and ultimately, the crucial testimony of Nelson Sakaguchi, some measure of justice would be served. Nwude pulled out all the stops during his trials to evade trouble, leveraging his vast criminal empire and associates outside of prison to create chaos and disrupt the proceedings. But it wasn't enough. Sakaguchi, who had also been arrested in the United States for his embezzlement and for opening bank accounts to engage in the airport scam fraud, was pivotal in securing the conviction of Emmanuel and his accomplices. Following his testimony, Nwude, who had previously pleaded not guilty, changed his plea to guilty. There was no escaping it. He had been caught. Nwude was sentenced to 25 years in prison, 5 sentences of 5 years each, all of which could be served consecutively. This meant that while he would be serving 25 years on paper, he would only need to remain in prison for 5 years before being released. He would be required to forfeit his assets to repay the hundreds of millions stolen from Banco Noroeste, but he would later contest the seizure and recover some of those assets. Nelson Sakaguchi would not escape punishment either. He would serve 2 years in prison in Switzerland for money laundering. Don't forget to support me by subscribing to the channel and hitting the like button so I can continue to share this content.